Hello and welcome. Thank you for your time today. I'm sure I've spoken to quite a lot of you already, but for those that don't know me, I'm Kenza. I'm the HR specialist here at Reed Edinburgh. And today we are joined by Karen Lothian, so I'm really excited to be hosting this live event. Karen has over 20 years experience within HR and helping businesses to overcome different challenges that they have, whether that's employee engagement, employer branding, cultural issues and diversity and inclusion, which has obviously become quite a key part at the moment of HR, quite a key focus that we've seen a lot of our clients looking into this year. With the lockdown that we've been experiencing, homeschooling, working from home, a real change in how the working world is, we've seen a focus and on to the flexible working practices for businesses and what different things that they can offer. So this webinar, as you can see from the title, is challenging the stigma towards working fathers. So we will be covering that along with some other important parts of diversity and inclusion with Karen. So we do have a few more people that have joined on now. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so there should be a Q&A box at the top, which will you'll be able to add in at any point, and we will go over them at the end. We're expecting that the webinar will last between 35 to 45 minutes, just so you've got a rough idea. And as I said, the questions at the end, so feel free to pop anything in as we go. I think that's everything that I needed to cover at the moment. So I think we can just pass over to Karen now, who can start us off with the webinar. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Kenza, for the lovely introduction and for all of you coming along today. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today about this topic, and certainly in the time I've been working around this, I have seen some real changes in this area. I have some really important points that I want to make sure that I get across to you in today's session, so if my eyes do flick across to the left, then I am just checking, I suppose, my content as opposed to just staring about what's happening outside the window. I also thought when I was going to do this presentation that maybe standing was a good option, but I realised I actually moved around a little bit too much, so sitting down seems the best way. So just thinking about dads, I am often asked, well, why dads? And I think, well, why not? Throughout the course of my career, I've seen a significant rise in dads who want to play a more active role in raising their children. Some want to be stay-at-home dads, look after their children and have their partner, mum, go off to work, where others are keen to have more flexibility around how they work. I think the one thing that actually they have in common is a sense of frustration around the strictures of our society that don't really allow these lifestyle choices to be followed. As Kenza said, I have been working in HR now for 20 years, predominantly as an HR generalist. I've worked in multiple different organisations throughout the UK. A lot of them have been male-dominated industries, and some of them include Baillie Gifford, Hyundai and Sodexo. I took a big step last year in April to set up my own coaching business. I think in hindsight that probably wasn't the right time to do that, but we could have never predicted the pandemic to arrive. My focus was working with dads, and through that time and through conversations with dads, I realised that actually what I wanted to do was work more with organisations and thinking about how do we change the conversation around dads in the workplace, how do we create a more equal parenting culture through looking at behaviours and how that will change the culture. And that is one of the reasons why I set up my current company, which is Olren. So I just want to focus on in terms of where we currently are, in terms of what we offer and what's going on at the moment. So during the current pandemic, some fathers and I suppose a lot of mothers as well who were working from home felt too much like they were living in work and being overwhelmed by the strain of, I suppose, performing lots of different tasks, from working to do homeschooling. For others, it became apparent that actually it was a real light bulb moment where that less traditional model offered them real advantages. So no longer did they have to commute to work, and actually that meant that they had a great deal of flexibility to be at home and spend more time with their family. And that has been a real life-changing thing for them. Not surprisingly, I think flexible workings have started to increase. However, the stats disappointingly show that men are actually more likely to have their flexible working requests rejected compared to their mum requesting it. And actually, in a poll that was conducted by working dads and working mums, found that actually 2 in 5 fathers who had applied for flexible working actually had their request turned down. Another one of the stats talked about that 1 in 5 working dads who actually had flexible working arrangements felt discriminated against by their managers and their co-workers. And actually then a quarter reported their line managers did not understand the pressures of juggling family life. So they're quite worrying stats that we're looking at in terms of how organisations are working around their flexible working requests. And actually, if we carry on along this particular line, there is a real potential that they could be looked at being less favourable treatment resulting in discrimination claims. And actually, there has been a case of Walkinshaw versus John Martin Group, where the father requested to work or change his hours because his wife was going on maternity leave. He had that rejected and then subsequently raised a claim because he then saw his female colleagues being granted flexible working. And actually, he was then successful in his claim. We all know how damaging discrimination claims can be both financially and reputationally, so I think it's something that we have to be really mindful in this current world, that actually we're treating all working requests equally. And as part of that, and I think quite importantly, is actually how does that impact on our gender pay gap? So if we are allowing men to work more flexibly or work part-time, then this will actually, or could change the way our gender pay gap figures look. In the last couple of roles that I've held, I've often been surprised that actually the pay gap isn't at the top level or in the senior roles. It's actually further down where we have a lot of roles held by part-time women. And I think that is something to consider when we're looking to do vacancies in recruitment, that actually we are trying to bring more fathers or men into those particular roles, and that would switch, certainly in the roles I have seen, the gender pay gap. There's some research from the Office of National Statistics around the number of hours that men are now spending in childcare since lockdown began in March last year, and it's hard to believe that it's a year on of us working from home. And on average, they were spending about 58% of their time. In comparison to 2015, that was actually only 39%. So over that period of time, there's been an increase of 27%. And actually, I'm quite sure if we looked at the figures now, that actually we would see that probably is a higher number. I think one thing that I can see from these figures is there's a real natural movement of dads wanting to spend more time at home, and it's thinking about being able to provide different platforms to support them in order for them to be able to do this. I just wanted to also focus on the current policies that are in place. We obviously have paternity leave that is set at 2 weeks. Sometimes this is full pay for both weeks, sometimes it's statutory one and full pay for another, which isn't a huge amount of time for dads to spend with their kids when they are born. There's also shared paternity leave, which I know some people say is incredibly complex, that the government set up under the banner of shared parenting matters, really to encourage fathers to share that parenting role and benefit from having a great relationship with their families and their child. Unfortunately, stats show that the take-up is really low. I think it sits about 1%, and a lot of fathers cite the reason for them not taking it up is an impact on their career, negative comments that they receive from their colleagues, or the bigger financial loss if they are a main provider for that particular family. An example, I suppose, of what I see as best practice is from Aviva. They are one of the growing numbers of companies within the UK that offer equal parental leave. Each employee is entitled to 6 months leave on full pay, irrespective of their gender, sexual orientation, or how they became parents. So actually that makes them one of the most generous in the UK. And actually, if both parents work for Aviva, they can both take 6 months off at the same time, and that I think is really important. I have spoken to a few fathers who work for Aviva, and a lot of them comment on how important it was for them to be at home supporting their partner, supporting the little one, and the benefits that came alongside that, that they didn't have to worry about going back to work, especially where perhaps the birth had been a little bit more complex or the little one had been in ICU. Actually, they were able to have that time to really spend and enjoy it with their family. And there's real clear evidence that shows that dads who are involved before a baby is born, that they will continue to be engaged when the baby arrives. And this evidence continues as the baby starts to grow, and actually their father's involvement has a huge impact on the child's development. And this then continues when a child gets older, and actually it shows that the father's involvement actually has a real impact on their behaviour, enjoyment, performance and attitudes towards school. And I think being present is not enough, and actually it's the role modelling that dads will do that has that positive impact. So by actually allowing dads a longer time to spend with their baby has huge impacts, huge positive changes for that child. So I think it's something that we need to really consider when we're looking at our policies. I want to do just a really quick poll, and that's just really about what everyone thinks about is the biggest barrier for creating an equal parenting organisation. And I've just put a couple of options. There's obviously D for other. So I'm happy for you just to pop in your chat box what you feel are the biggest barriers, and we will then collate some of those responses. While that's sort of going through, I want to kind of just move on to what I think are the biggest challenges and barriers that we face, and I hope that the results will reflect in the same way. And I think for me, the biggest barrier is fatherhood being equal to motherhood. And as previously mentioned before, in the pandemic, there was already a rise in fathers planning to pursue flexible working options in order to get a better family balance, but many were being denied by their organisation. There is still very much a huge cultural stigma around the role of dads and massive organisational barriers to how dads should be at work. And I think quite disappointingly was when I found some research that was done by Powwow Now that stated 1 in 5 fathers actually had faked an illness at work to manage childcare. And I think this is really disappointing to see that you know, they do not feel comfortable within their organisation to be able to say You know, I want to take time out. I want to look after my child because it's not very well, or I need to go and pick up from school. So it really shows that there's a real barrier there that allows dads to, you know, feel comfortable to ask those questions. Along with that, there's obviously a lot of the misguided perceptions around the roles that are held, that, you know, men are meant to be the breadwinners, females are the caregivers. And actually, there's a real feeling that they are incredibly outdated. However, they are real, active, powerful stereotypes that dominate, I think, our society. They cast quite a big shadow over our attitudes and behaviours at home and at work. And I think whether we like it or not, they are almost like silent guidelines that frame our lives and undermine our attempts at progress. And just going to go back to the results there, there was a real 50-50 split between sort of it being cultural and also stereotypes. So it's a feeling that actually we're all thinking around the same things that's actually stopping us sort of changing the attitudes of dads in the workplace. And that really is sort of covered off that, you know, many dads do worry about taking an increased parenting role because of these sort of stigmas and stereotypes, and often being mocked by their colleagues if they opt to work part-time. I think there's a real need that fathers to have their roles and responsibilities acknowledged and respected in an equal way. And I think also the impact of the attitudes that are happening in organisation around dads in the workplace is that some of them are considering a move or have already moved. In the Millennial Dad at Work report, which was undertaken by Daddy Life and Deloitte, they highlighted that 1/3 of dads have changed jobs to get a better work-life balance, and actually 1/3 are now also looking to leave. We all know that it costs a lot to bring a new employee into the organisation, and I think at the moment it's set around 45,000 to replace an employee. So it's not just about looking at the agency fees or salary, it's also looking at, you know, what's the impact in terms of the loss of productivity of not having that person in that role. There's also the loss of morale for other people having to pick up that work, maybe having to work longer to cover that. There's interview costs and training costs as well. So not only does it impact the organisation, it will also impact the bottom line as well. So I feel like I'm just doing another poll, but I am going to do another poll, and this time it's just about having a look about what you currently have in place in terms of supporting dads. So again, it's just the same format. If you can just pop A, B, C or D, or any other comments that you would like to make, and then we can let you know what the results are. But while you are all doing that, I will kind of move on to the last part, where I just want to talk about what I think are the real considerations that organisations need to make to have a more inclusive parenting culture. And you may be already doing some of these, but it's about creating or putting the pieces together as a jigsaw puzzle to kind of change maybe the results that you're looking to get in this particular area. I think the most important for me, and it came out apparent in the last sort of poll, is around challenging that cultural stigma around working dads. We know how difficult it is to change a culture in an organisation, and I don't know how many of you have had the experience of launching something and actually it hasn't quite worked, or it hasn't quite taken off, and there's nothing worse than having that feeling of thinking what didn't quite go right. And I think for me, the changes in employee behaviours are the ones that make the difference between things that succeed and things that don't quite work. And for me, I think one of the important things is actually getting leaders and maybe key advocates around the organisation that are discussing and demonstrating the desired behaviours that you are looking to implement. And by doing this, this will help accelerate the change and encourage others to kind of copy and follow those behaviours. And I think we are that type of society that if we see somebody doing something or we do something often enough, it starts to change the way that we act. It's part of that cultural change. I think it's about looking at role models throughout the organisation. And I say throughout because I've read a lot of information around where it says, you know, senior role models, but I think in this case it's really important to have them throughout your organisation, where people can relate to them in different levels throughout the organisation, and they're not looking at senior leaders thinking, well, that's actually just an elitist perk that they get to do. If you've got people all the way throughout the organisation, then actually people will go, well, I can see they can do it, well, maybe then I can do that too. And I think that's a great way to change the way that people think. The next thing is looking at bringing dads into, I suppose, parenting discussion. So we talked earlier about the policies, we talked about what Aviva are doing, and is there something around that we look to increase paternity leave to bring it up to the same as maternity pay, or is it that just we want to increase it a little bit longer and at full pay to try and encourage dads to take that time out? In a similar way to Aviva, I actually read an article recently about an Australian legal firm that had just done that, and they changed their culture around working parents. And similarly to Aviva, they created a policy that is equal paid leave entitlements for both mothers and fathers. And I actually really like their ethos, where they talk about that they don't have primary and secondary carers, they actually have parents. And I think that's a really important step to break down some of those stereotypes that we talk about parents rather than paternity or maternity. I've talked before just about flexible working, and I think in contrast where I've said before around employees or fathers having their applications rejected, there is still a little bit of an education piece around flexible working, and some research by King's College stated that a third of fathers within the UK are actually unaware that they are eligible to take flexible working. So I think there's kind of twofold in terms of this area. It's about looking at how do we ensure that we are treating all applications fairly, but also are we promoting that enough through the organisation? And if so, how do we do that to make sure that fathers understand they can take flexible working, and that actually there's a lot of different options out there, not just part-time work or job sharing. So there's two kind of bits we need to look around for flexible working. And then the last one really is just about offering workplace initiatives. Everywhere that I have worked, there's been a huge amount of focus on mums, so mums going on maternity leave, mums returning, lots of support, mentoring programs. And I suppose the question is why don't we have something similar for dads? In the time that I've been doing my coaching and also just working with dads, they often say that they are totally excluded from conversations before the baby is born and afterwards. All of these conversations are focused towards the mum. They often don't know what to do or where to fit in. And I think alongside offering perhaps a mentoring programme or support for dads in work, there could also be a piece around education, helping them, giving them the confidence and support to understand where their role is and what they need to do with the little one. And by doing that, will obviously help them become more engaged and help support their child's development. I think what comes out for me the most in all of this is if we can change the conversation around dads, if we can eliminate the stereotypes, that this will help both both mums and dads, but really support women, because you are breaking down the stereotype around mums being the caregiver. And I think that's really important to try and open the conversation around having a real equal gender workplace, and that becoming a reality rather than a sort of distant dream. So in summary, you know, I've talked a lot about some of the things that we can do for fathers, talked about some of the challenges that are happening out there. And I think now more than ever, it's a great time to start having this conversation. I said most of us have been working home for a year. A lot of dads have experienced a very different kind of working style. And with the vaccine now continuing to roll out at great speed, and hopefully will continue to do regardless of what's happening in the EU, I really think it's a perfect opportunity for HR and organisations to become that influencer or a stronger influencer, to start driving that change, finding ways of working through kind of barriers and to benefit both genders and have those, you know, equal conversations. And by that way we can create actions and policies around how we enable sort of, I suppose, a new type of family going forward. So thank you very much for your time, and I can see some questions in the chat box, so I'm happy to start answering those. I've got one here that says, do you think if we implement more support for dads, this should be the same as what we offer for mums, or are areas that need to be different? I think there's maybe a couple of different options. I think where I talked about the sort of educational pace for dads, and actually being able to support them with what it's like to become a dad. I don't think there's a huge amount out there, although I know there are different groups. I think it's also important to understand about mental health. So as many dads suffer from postnatal depression as mums do, and I think that's really key, but it's not something that's talked about a lot. So I think there can be similarities in terms of the support. So it could be mentoring groups, it could be working parent groups, but it's maybe fine-tuning some parts that are relevant to either side. So I think it's trying to be, I suppose, thoughtful about what you want to offer there in terms of the organisation. There's another question here that says, what are dads telling you about how they feel and the support they need to help to create a more equal workplace? You know, that's a really good question. It's something that has come up a lot. I think for the dads that I've spoken to, there's a real want of fairness in this area, and being able to have the same policies or same access that mums do. So finding a way of making a balance, but also being able to make them feel really comfortable about being able to take time off, and not feeling that they're under scrutiny, or that it's going to impact their career if they take that time out. So there's a lot of focus on how they feel within the organisation, how they feel that their colleagues treat them, how their line manager treats them. So I think for them it would be being able to break down some of those barriers, being able to work flexibly without any questions being asked. That's the only two questions I can see in the chat box at the moment. Does anybody else wants to ask any questions? So I can see one question there about what role can governments play to improve family matters for fathers and obtain gender equality. I think for me, it's they did a lot of work around shared parental leave. I think now it's time to start changing that conversation. I know that there have been conversations. I think Nicola Sturgeon has talked about increasing paternity leave, and I think for them it's about really starting to focus on what does that look like. They've increased stuff around the baby boxes that we get, but it's now starting to look at you know, what other policies, what can we do to what we currently have. I do think 2 weeks paternity leave is nothing, and whether that is a case of extending it and whether the government will look to make that as a mandatory move, or whether there should be, and in my view, maybe a more of creating an equal parenting policy. So actually it doesn't really matter whether you are male or female. It's actually it's for you as a parent, and I think that would really help change that conversation for dads and for mums. As I've said before, if we can remove those stereotypes about who does what, then actually you would get greater gender equality across. So I think the government needs to start looking at policies in a very different way, and actually perhaps stop making them gender specific. And then I can see another question here is, how do we encourage dads to take paternity leave? I think that's a really good question, and I think part of it is around promotion of the policy, being able to talk about the benefits of why they should take parental paternity leave, so the importance of them being at home to support their partner and support the little one as well. However, I do think that that's quite difficult when it is only 2 weeks. Again, I think there is something around thinking about how do we make it attractive to them if they're thinking about loss of earnings. Is there something else that we can do? But 2 weeks isn't a huge amount of time. So again, that's where I would look to the question before, is thinking about how do we how can we increase that so actually it's for them to spend time, and the benefits that we've talked about in terms of their child's development and them being present for their child. I don't think it's easy, because I think it's really embedded in cultures where dads don't, and I think even Boris Johnson didn't, so that's maybe not particularly helpful in this world where we're trying to encourage that to happen. But I think it's that ongoing conversation and trying to embed the importance of dads taking paternity leave. Got one more question, which is, what is the one small thing organisations could do right now which would have an impact on dads in the workplace? I think there's probably a couple of things that organisations can do, because I appreciate the culture is a big piece, but I think it would be looking at policies perhaps, or looking at support programmes that they could put in place that would really be there to help dads, giving them some space that they can maybe chat with other dads about experiences. We know that men don't tend to group together the same way women do, but by creating that really safe space for them to have conversations, and maybe it is a mentoring programme that allows dads to have that safe space to start talking about what it's like and understand, I think we'd have a great shift, because it's not something that they actually naturally do. So I think for me that would be the first one, and then maybe it's about really promoting those policies that you have in the organisation and talking around the benefits. So I think that's all the questions at the moment. So it's been really great to have the opportunity to chat to you all today, and if anybody would like to have a further conversation, then please do get in touch. I'd love to have conversations around how we can start changing this and changing the stigma around working dads.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time, Karen. I think that's been some really great insights into diversity and inclusion, the working father. I'm sure things we've not all considered, and it's good to have those insights from yourself. Some really important things that we can all go away and think about and start looking at our family policies and what we can implement going forward for the future. So I think we'd all like to thank you for your time. I know that we will be putting out some of the slides, some of the Q&As, and this has also been recorded. So if anyone would like to request any of that information or have any feedback, any further questions, or would like to be put in touch with Karen, then please do get in touch with myself, Kenza Watson at Reed HR. I'll also be following up with everyone that attended just to see if there's anything else that we can support on you. So yeah, I think that's really everything. I'd like to thank you all for your time. A nice sort of shorter session today, but some really great information in there. So we'll get everything sent out to you, but do not hesitate to get in touch with any queries that you do have. Thank you.